on the lecture notes are the ones that we're responsible for. So A and P. When we talk about hematology, immunology, again, the A and P is so important, right? Like I mentioned last time, the A and P is so important. You guys just finished cardiovascular. What is the main function of the heart? Big muscle. What's the main function of the heart? It's a pumping mechanism, right? It pumps blood, and the pumping action in children, it could be about 100 per minute. In your infants, it's about 140 per minute. All right, what is it for adults?
60 to 80.
100, approximately in that range, right? But for children, it can vary. Most often, it's about 100 to about 150 is the range, depending on the age. The younger the child, the smaller the heart, and the faster it beats. All right? And so the pumping action of the heart gets the blood flowing through all of the various systems in the body. Okay? Today, right now, what I'm going to talk about is the actual blood that's inside those vessels. The blood vessels themselves. Everything that has to do with hematology, immunology. Okay? So we look at A and P. So then hematology basically is the blood, right? And several of you posted. I had about 2/3 of you post on the discussion post, so make sure you review that because those are really good. A lot of it is A and P. That's really good review for you as you prepare for test next week. Okay? So make sure you know what blood is, the function of blood, and some of you already posted that. Components of blood. All right? More than half of blood is plasma or liquid. The other, about a third of it is about cellular components. Okay? Plasma, the liquid part, and then the cellular components. When we talk about cellular components, we're talking about things like red blood cells, white blood cells, okay? Platelets, all of the hydrogen, nitrogen, all of the things, the components, ions, cells that are floating through the bloodstream. Okay? And just to review, what are some of the functions of blood? Okay, carry oxygen throughout the blood, the body. Every cell needs oxygen to function, correct? Every cell needs oxygen and glucose to function. Every cell in the body. We're talking about brain cells, all the way to your muscle cells. Every cell in the body needs oxygen and glucose to function. So what oxygen does, what the blood does is it's a transport. The blood vessels are your transport, like a highway or a freeway throughout the body. And it transports blood, and blood contains such vital nutrients, oxygen, etc., that all of the cells need. Okay? Now, once the oxygen is in the cell, I don't know if you went over this in respiratory, oxygen is needed for metabolism of those cells. Okay? And then the byproduct is carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide then is transported in the blood as well and excreted primarily out of the lungs when you breathe out. Okay, so it does function as a transports oxygen, transports vital nutrients to all of the cells. What else does the blood do?
Regulates temperature.
What was that?
Regulates temperature.
Regulates temperature. Very good. How does it regulate temperature? Any of you drawn blood before?
Yes.
How does the tubule feel when you get the blood? It's warm. And what happens in the tubules? Sometimes it's fairly visible. What happens inside the tubules?
Condensation.
Condensation. It gets like humidity inside it because it's so warm. What is the temperature of blood? It's above body temperature. What is normal body temperature?
97.
About 99 for children. It's about a degree higher. About 100.4 for children, the temperature of blood. That's why when you get blood in the tubules, the tubes feel really warm, even with your blood flow. And it's kind of humidified within that tube. Almost 100.4 in children. Okay? It does help with temperature regulation, but how does it help with temperature regulation? How does blood help with temperature regulation? You're right, but what part of it? Any ideas? The plasma? Go ahead. The blood vessels? Okay, the blood vessels do have a part in adjusting, but the actual temperature control is really in the plasma, the liquid. Remember, the plasma can absorb and release heat. The plasma can absorb, it's mostly fluid, it can absorb and release heat. So it does kind of check and see what's going on. As a child develops fever, for example, and the body temperature rises, okay, what the body does is cause a little bit of vasodilation so that the temperature kind of cools down a little bit with vasodilation. Okay? If the body detects that the body's really getting cold, say the child is outside and getting hypothermic, then the blood vessels will constrict in order to maintain warm temperature within 4 vital organs. Okay, so blood vessels do help control the temperature, but the actual temperature regulation occurs in the plasma of the blood. Okay? If I were to put a tourniquet on my arm, how will my fingers, the temperature of my finger be in a little bit? Cool, right? So that's basically a constricted my blood vessels. And so the flow of blood has decreased, and therefore it's going to feel more cool. It's going to be cool to touch. Okay? All right, so it's very important. Blood does control temperature. It helps to regulate temperature. Now, we spoke about vasoconstriction and vasodilation, so that occurs in the blood vessels. What actually controls blood vessels? What helps to regulate that constriction and dilation? What controls blood vessels? What are blood vessels made of? Okay. Autonomic nervous system, but what are blood vessels made of? What type of muscle? Smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is involuntary control by the autonomic nervous system. So the blood vessels, and if they constrict, dilated, is really dependent on what's going on in the internal environment as well as the external environment. One example is what I just mentioned, the hypothermia that occurs in the external environment causes, the body detects that, the brain detects it, and the autonomic nervous system will constrict the blood vessels so that it conserves body heat to those vital organs. Okay? So it's the autonomic nervous system that's functioning with the blood vessels to help adjust that. All right? So if somebody does have brain trauma, for example, injury, autonomic nervous system is not working too well, guess what? It can potentially lead to death because there's nothing really controlling the blood vessels. Okay, so some of the things that we have to really think about. Blood forming organs. So when we talk about hematology, we got to talk about where do these blood cells come from. Well, bone marrow, we talked about that last week, right? Bone marrow is where all of the blood cells are produced. All of the blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are produced in the bone marrow. Okay. What does the spleen do? Where is the spleen? Somewhere in the abdomen. Okay. On the left upper quadrant, left upper quadrant is a very vascular organ. What it does is really help to filter the blood. Kind of like the kidney, but it really is looking for things like bacteria and those kinds of things to help filter. Okay? The liver is also a vascular organ. A lot of metabolism occurs in the liver. Lymph nodes. How are the lymph nodes related to hematology? What do lymph nodes do? Filter the blood. It filters the blood. It filters the lymphatic system. Again, it's helping to keep the body healthy, get rid of mainly things like bacteria, viruses, those kinds of things. Okay? So the lymphatic system is very important. Lymph nodes, we always check. We talk about lymph nodes when we talk about leukemia, for example. Because in certain types of leukemia, Hodgkin's lymphoma, for example, you have lymph nodes that are enlarged. All right, so we're really trying to see, okay, what's going on? Is this just an upper ear infection, upper respiratory infection, or is it something else that's going on? Okay, more critical. The thymus gland. Well, we never talked about the thymus gland, right? What does thymus gland do? Where is it located? A little picture of it. Right below the sternum, in the chest cavity, thorax. Okay? The thymus gland is really responsible for helping stimulate production of T cells. You've heard of T cells? Very important immune system function cells, T cells and B cells. But the thymus gland, one of the main things that it does is help to produce or stimulate production of T cells. So when we talk about hematology, all of these things come into play because when we look at a child who has some type of hematological problem, then we really need to look at some of all of these areas actually. And we can't really quite pinpoint what's going on. So it delivers oxygen, transports hormones. When we talk about endocrine, we'll talk about it really helps to transport and takes it to the target cells. You remember that from endocrine. Inflammatory and immune responses. We talked about T cells, B cells, white blood cells, differential white blood cells, right? Lymphocytes, phagocytes. All of these cells help to keep the immune system healthy and functioning. And it's also part of the inflammatory process. So if there is an injury, for example, you're going to have redness, swelling. You're going to have more blood that's shunted to the area. That's part of that inflammatory process, right? To help repair the area quickly. We talked about temperature regulation. What about fluid and electrolyte balance? How does the hematologic system help maintain fluid and electrolyte balance? We talked about that with the kidneys last week. Don't ask any questions. Just go on with the lecture. We only have an hour left. Fluid and electrolyte imbalance or balance. Are there electrolytes transported in the bloodstream?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And depending on, remember those, the autonomic nervous system, any changes in the environment, if there is, for example, low sodium, it's part of it will affect the blood vessels to kind of constrict and make sure it's not depleting a lot of that electrolytes. Same thing with fluid. Okay, so we have other mechanisms along with the kidneys to help regulate. So it's not just the whole function is not on the kidney. The fluid and electrolyte balance is also balanced by the blood vessels as well. And then what about acid-base balance? When we talk about acid-base, what are we really talking about? pH of the blood, maintaining a neutral pH. And I mentioned that briefly last time. What's the neutral or what's the pH of the blood?
7.35 to 7.45.
7.35 to 4.5. Right? So it should be very neutral. If it gets too acidic, then the child can go into metabolic acidosis, respiratory acidosis, usually metabolic acidosis. If it gets too alkaline, they can get into metabolic alkalosis, which means there's a lot of ions, hydrogen ions, nitrogen ions, bicarb that's being really shifted now, and the child can go into potentially having seizures, GI distress, a whole slew of things. Your respiratory arrest, those kinds of things. So it helps to maintain acid-base balance because the bloodstream has hydrogen and nitrogen and bicarb. So it helps, again, blood vessels help to regulate that based on what's going on in the internal and external environment. Okay. So there's a lot of things going on here. Okay. So I mentioned that the pumping action of the heart causes blood to be shifted or transported through all of these blood vessels, right? You've got arterioles, arteries, arterioles, and then the smaller, finer vessels that go into all of your, like your hands and toes, etc. And then you have the venules and the veins that bring the blood back to the heart. What actually helps the blood come back to the heart with all of the waste products? So the pumping action of the heart gets the blood through the arterioles, right, through to where it's supposed to go. But what actually helps that blood to come back through the venous system, back to the heart? Say that again. Okay, I heard a couple of you. The valves and the veins, actually, so arteries don't have any valves, but veins do, which makes it harder for the blood to come back to the heart, correct? So what actually makes it come back? It is actually muscle contraction, skeletal action of the skeletal muscle. So when I'm walking, there's contraction, relaxation of the muscles. And that helps to transport the blood back. That's why those who exercise a lot, right, have decreased chances of complications because, when you have a child that is bedridden for a long period of time, some of you, I heard from my clinical students, you guys were in the nursing home in the first semester for clinical. Many of you. What do we see with geriatric patients? Are they mobile and running and going to the exercise room? And most of them are bedridden. Okay? What's the number one complication that occurs when a patient is immobile? DVT, deep vein thrombosis. Deep vein thrombosis, because what happens is you have stasis of the blood. There's not much movement. There's not much contraction of those muscles. They're bedridden. If somebody turns them, great. If not, there's really not much movement. So the pumping action of the heart's there, but really there's not much help for that blood to return. And so that stasis is going to increase the chances of thrombus formation. Okay? So then you have a potential for deep vein thrombosis. And when you have thrombosis, you have potential that can dislodge, right? Small embolism, emboli, that can then travel to the lungs, brain, liver, anywhere, and can potentially cause clots and rupture. Okay. So the pumping action of the heart gets the blood going through the arterial system, but it's really muscle contractions that help the blood to get back to the heart. So it's very important. So we have to think about those things when you have a child that's immobile. Okay. How is the circulation in this child? What can we do to improve circulation? So most of those geriatric patients, what did you see when they were immobile? What did they do as far as nursing intervention?
Compression socks.
Compression devices, right? Either the intermittent compression devices, the electronic ones, or TED hose, compression hose, which are not so comfortable, right? And a lot of patients don't use them because they're not comfortable. They feel tight. Yeah. Okay. What else? Range of motion. What type? If they're not able to move on their own, active range of motion. Passive is when you're actually doing the flexion extension of the foot and the knees and the hips and all of that. Active is when the patient is able to do it. Okay? So a lot of passive range of motion, making sure the patient is turned every 2 hours so that we can prevent some of that stasis. Okay? So we got to think about those kinds of things. If we know what AMP is of the blood vessels, what affects us, then really it helps us to understand nursing care as well. We talked about hematopoiesis is a term, fancy term for basically blood cell production, and it primarily occurs in the bone marrow. Okay. So again, all of the stem cells occur in the bone marrow. So say a patient has, you heard the term aplastic anemia? What is that? Aplastic anemia. Is it just red blood cells? That's not enough. Aplastic anemia. That's when basically all of the cells are low. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Aplastic anemia. So you see basically a general decrease in blood cell count. Okay? Aplastic anemia. So there's probably some type of cancer now, right? So immature or cancerous cells have taken over, and there's really not enough normal blood cells being produced for aplastic anemia. You've heard of neutropenia? So that's just very specific of what blood cells are down, right? The neutrophils are very low. So you'll see patients on neutropenic precaution. Okay? Aplastic anemia, on the other hand, is basically all of the cells are low. So these are the patients who are on reverse isolation. Their immune system's not functioning to protect them, and so they have to be protected from us. So reverse isolation. So I'm a visual learner, so I got lots of pictures. This is what I was talking about earlier, the composition of the blood. 55% is liquid. All right? Mostly water. So what does that mean for a child whose body mass index is primarily fluid? What happens when they get a fever? They get sick. They have vomiting, diarrhea. They can get dehydrated very quickly because the body mass index primarily, the composition of the blood primarily is fluid. And so they can get depleted very quickly. 10%, and we're starting to see signs, significant signs in that child. 5 to 10% fluid loss. Okay? So you have the blood proteins, hormones, electrolytes, nutrients, and then you have the cellular composition. What does all this mean? A CBC. A patient is not feeling well, or someone comes in and not feeling well into the clinic. Parents say the child's been, maybe having some runny nose, not really doing well, very tired. So one of the main tests, blood work that's done is CBC, a complete blood count. A stat blood count can get results in about 15-20 minutes. Stat CBC. And it's pretty cheap to do as well, just like we talked about the urinalysis. So one of the most predominantly done blood tests is the CBC, and then the urinalysis. Okay? Urinalysis, of course, is not a blood test, but gives us good information quickly, very cheap test. So CBC, make sure you look at the components of the CBC. And make sure you know the norms for the children, and I saw many of you posted what the norms were. Right? And know what the functions are. What does the white blood cells do in general? Hemoglobin, hematocrit, what are they? Platelets, reticulocyte count, somebody posted on that as well. RBC. Right? A peripheral, let me go back to the WBC. If just a PBC is ordered, you're going to get a WBC count, and that's it. That's just a general percentage of our WBC in that whole blood. That's it. But if the order is for CBC with differential, okay, that's when some of you posted on that as well. This is when really they look and see now specifically how many neutrophils, lymphocytes, macrophages, etc. are in that count. Does that make sense? So just a plain CBC will give you a WBC. That's it. But if it says CBC with differential, then the lab is going to do all the differentials of the white blood cells. Okay? So if a child comes in really sick and we're not sure what's going on, maybe the first test might just be a CBC, where we get a WBC. But if that child's coming back sick and we're quite not sure and none of the tests are really specific, then we do a differential. So that costs more. Okay? And it does take a little bit longer. RBC with peripheral smear. So if you do a CBC, you're going to get a RBC count. That's it. But if it specifically says peripheral smear, somebody posted on that as well. That's more specific. Now it looks at RBCs. It looks at the volume of that RBC, the size, the color, morphology. Does that make sense? So peripheral smear gives a more detailed account of what that RBC looks like. Not just the count, but the composition of that RBC. Okay? So there are some specifics there. Coagulation studies, there's PT, PGT, there's INR, there's a ton more of things that can be done, right? Factor 8 levels, all of those things. But coagulation studies are not a standard study that's done on all of your patients. If we have someone that comes in and they're bleeding very frequently or bruising very easily, guess what? We're going to get a complete coagulation study on that patient to see what's going on. Where is the problem? Where is the deficiency? Or there's too much? All right, so coagulation studies are not normally done, but if there is an indication for it, signs and symptoms, then those studies are done. But almost always we do a CBC on almost every patient just to kind of get a baseline of where they are. So make sure you know diagnostics. Make sure you know what these components are, normal values. Bone marrow aspiration. Where do we do bone marrow aspiration? What locations for children?
Here.
The hip. Iliac. All right, and in your infants is the tibia. All right, bone marrow space is inside the bone. Very painful procedure. So this is not something that we line everybody up to do a bone marrow aspiration on. It's really on those that really, okay, now the blood count looks just weird. There is something not right here. And the child is just frequently ill. And we do this with a lot of times suspicion for leukemia, some of the blood cancers, etc. They do a bone marrow. Okay? When a child needs a bone marrow aspiration or biopsy, the preparation, like we talked about for the renal biopsy, is similar. The child has to be NPO for about 4 to 6 hours prior to, so we just keep them NPO overnight or after midnight, and then usually it's scheduled in the morning, about 7 or 8, depends on the facility. Okay? So NPO Make sure the vitals are normal, a complete, all of the set of labs are done on that patient, so we have, and usually by the time we do a bone marrow aspiration, guess what? There are a ton of labs already on that